This is Chapter 12, Lesson 6, Part 2. We are continuing with dividing square roots. The last thing that we did on the Part 1 video was finding conjugates of expressions. So now we're going to use that to work on problem number 8. Problem 8 says rationalize the denominator of each of the following fractions. So let's look at Part B. For Part B, we have square root 6 over square root 6 minus 2. To get rid of this square root in the denominator, we need to rationalize the fraction. To do that, we multiply by its conjugate. The conjugate, we write down both terms, square root 6, and we write down a 2. We have a negative here, so we change that to a positive. And then we're going to write the same thing in our numerator. So square root 6 plus 2 over square root 6 plus 2 is actually just 1. We're multiplying by 1 to get an equivalent fraction. So when I multiply across my numerator, we have root 6 times root 6, that's 6. Root 6 times 2, that is 2 root 6. Don't make the mistake of multiplying a number that's outside of a square root by a number that's inside of a square root. You will not get root 12. This is 2 times root 6. Now in our denominator, because we have the difference of two terms multiplied by the sum of two terms, we know we're going to get the difference of two squares. So we're going to take our first term and square it. Root 6 squared is 6. And then we're going to subtract the square of our second term. Our second term is 2. When we square that, we get 4. So this is going to be 6 plus 2 root 6 over 4. I'm sorry, over 2, because 6 minus 4 is 2. So now we can say 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 2 root 6 divided by 2 is just a root 6. Okay, so now let's look at Part D. Part D is square root 7 plus 1 over square root 7 minus 1. What we need to do is multiply by the conjugate of our denominator. So I'm going to write my times in my fraction bar. The conjugate of root 7 minus 1 is root 7 plus 1. Same two terms, but we have a plus instead of a minus. And now we write the same thing in our numerator. Okay, what we need to do now is multiply root 7 plus 1 by root 7 plus 1. Be careful how you do this. You can't just write your first and last terms. You have middle term also. So root 7 times root 7 is 7. Root 7 times 1 is root 7. 1 times root 7 is also root 7. And then 1 times 1 is 1. Now in our denominator, we square our first term. Root 7 squared is 7. And then we subtract the square of our second term. 1 squared is 1. What we end up with is 7 plus 1 is 8. Root 7 plus root 7 is 2 root 7. And then we're dividing by 7 minus 1, which is 6. Notice that all of these are even numbers, so we can divide everything by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so this is 1 root 7. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So our answer is 4 plus root 7 over 3. And this was number 8, which is just like number 16 that I assigned for homework. So the next thing we're going to look at is number 10. The instructions for number 10 say rationalize the denominator of each of the following fractions. Assume that the variables represent positive numbers. Okay, so first we're going to look at Part B. Part B is 1 over root x plus 1. Okay, to rationalize the denominator, we're going to multiply by the conjugate. We write the same two terms, and then instead of adding, we subtract. So I'm going to write the same thing in the numerator. Now we multiply across our numerators. 1 times root x minus 1 is root x minus 1. Our denominator, we square the first term. Root x squared is just x. We subtract the square of the second term. 1 squared is 1. So we have root x minus 1 over x minus 1. Okay, let's look now at Part C. Part C is x squared minus y over x minus root y. Now what we need to do is multiply by the conjugate of our denominator. So we're going to write x and we're going to write root y. This has a minus, so we're going to change to a plus. So here we have x plus root y. Okay, so now what we need to do, I'm just going to write down our two numerators that we're going to be, oh, sorry, this is just x squared minus y, not x squared minus y, not x squared minus y squared. Okay, and then this is times x plus root y. Now, in our denominator, we need to square our first term. X squared is x squared. And then we're going to subtract the square of our second term. Our second term is root y. When we square root y, we get y. And this is why I did not multiply out what we have in the numerator. Notice we have an x squared minus y in the numerator and an x squared minus y in the denominator, so they cancel. And our answer is x plus root y. So that was number 10. It is just like number 18 that I assigned for homework. We've got one last problem that we're going to do, which is problem number 11. Number 11 says solve each of the following equations for x. Leave your answers in radical form, but simplify them as much as possible. So we're going to start with part C. Part C says x over 5 is equal to the square root of 15. Now, how do we get the x by itself? Right now, it's divided by 5. To get rid of that, we need to multiply by 5. So then we will have x equals 5 root 15. Okay, let's take a look at part D. Part D says x over root 5 is equal to root 15. Okay, before we had x over 5 equals root 15. We multiply both sides by 5. We couldn't multiply the 5 and the 15 together because the 5 is outside of a square root and the 15 is inside of a square root. But look at what we have now. Now we have a 5 inside of a square root and we're going to multiply it by a 15 in a square root. So what we're going to end up with is x is equal to square root of 75. Now 75 has a square factor. We can write it as 25 times 3. So when we have that 25 and we square root it, the square root of 25 is 5, and then we still have a 3 left over in the root. Okay, so that was number 11. We've got one more part we're going to do. Let's look at 11F. 11F is root 3x is equal to 18. What we need to do is divide both sides by root 3. And we get that x is equal to 18 over root 3. To get an equivalent fraction, I can multiply by square root 3 over square root 3. 18 root 3 is our numerator, and our denominator is root 3 times root 3, which is just a 3. And you can see that we can simplify our fraction here. We have 18 over 3. That simplifies to a 6. So this is going to be 6 root 3 for number 11, part F. And that is just like number 19 that I assigned for homework, which is the last problem in set 3.